Good afternoon and you welcome back to The Marketplace, where we look at current trends on the international market and how it affects you out there if you are a consumer, and talking about things that affect consumers. Now, if you should drive to a service station this weekend, the price that you pay for a litre is expected to go down marginally. We understand that the expected reduction has been influenced by the review in prices that happens every 2 weeks. I'll be looking at this impact of this development for you as a consumer in the following report. Checks by Joy Business indicate the reduction has been influenced by the marginal stability in crude oil prices over the past 2 weeks. Projections by Joy Business shows that prices should be going down between 1 to almost 5%. LPG will witness the biggest reduction, as it expected to go down by 4.32% per kilogram. Petrol will witness a little over 1% fall in prices, whilst diesel should go down by 2.63%. With these calculations, a gallon of diesel which is being sold to you at around 16 Ghana cedis, 60 pesos, will just go down by 43 pesos. But here is the warning. Because of the current deregulation policy, some of the oil marketing companies may reduce their prices, whilst others could hold on to the current price. If the over 70 oil marketing companies reduce their prices, this could come as a big relief to consumers because of its impact on the cost of living. But with the current challenges with the city's stability and projections that crude oil prices could be going up in the coming weeks, maybe this relief might just last for a while. So that was a report I put in together, tried to look at the impact of this for you as a consumer. And as you just heard or watching that report, basically for the next 1 week, prices are going to go down. But you know, from December going, prices are expected to shoot up because of the current development on the international market. Well, it looks like government has policies in place to ensure that from December, if prices should start going up, it doesn't affect you that badly as a consumer. Finance Minister Setekwe has been throwing more light on this policy.
We have bought our second cargo of strategic stock. We are moving away from waiting and then being forced to pay subsidy. Like South Africa, US and other countries do, BOST has tanks, so we can rent and buy low. So when the prices are going up, we release. Or we sell, at prices which, maybe make some margin to put back into the fund. So from the stabilization fund, not the one under the ABFA, but the one under the levies, working with BOSS, we've been able to buy 2 cars. I think we are buying another half, from the revenue flows. So Ghana is moving into strategic stock, and hopefully that would, help pushing, anytime, petroleum prices begin to go up. It's another way of, managing.
So that was Finance Minister Setekwe actually explaining to us what government is doing to ensure that if you drive to the service station, maybe in December, when prices are expected to go up, it doesn't have any serious impact on you as a consumer. We're bringing you the response of those who actually import this product to find out what they make of this policy the government is planning to put in place, whether it is actually a prudent one or basically it is rather something that is actually going to affect you. It is good, it is bad, or the ugly side of this policy by government. Now, tomorrow, something interesting is going to happen in the industry. They call it the Gun Awards, basically recognizing those who are in the advertising industry who have been setting the standards for you and I to convince you to buy that particular product. So, how are preparations going like? This awards, we understand, has become the standard for actually recognizing those who have distinguished themselves in the advertising industry. Executive Secretary of the Association, Francis Darcy, has been telling us more about how they're actually ready for the awards that is tomorrow, the Gun Awards.
We received about 187 entries for the awards, cutting across the various sectors of the economy: finance and banking, insurance, property, oil and gas, food and confectionery, services. So we cut across all those sectors.
One would ask, what will be the theme or the focus as you recognize all these captains of the advertising industry who have distinguished themselves over the year?
The focus for this year, our theme in that regards is digital advertising in the global marketplace. Reason being is that digital advertising has become a very vast and new area, and advanced economies are capitalizing on it as one of the channels of communicating with audience. In this our part of the world, it is caught up, but it's not as we expected. So we need to continue to interrogate some of the reasons why we're in this situation.
Francis, that is the Executive Secretary of the Advertising Association of Ghana. And this weekend, the Gongon Awards. Why don't you get there to see whether your agency is actually going to pick all the awards and which awards will carry or which advert will carry the day. Now, let's get back to our earlier story where we were talking about development on the petroleum sector and the plan by government to basically step in and control prices, whether it is a good policy or not. We've been speaking to Senyor Hosi. He's the chief executive of the bulk oil distributors on whether or what he makes of this policy. So he's talking about the fact that he wants to build strategic reserves to deal with these expected hikes. As a player in this market, what do you make of that strategy by a regulator or a significant player in this market?
I mean, the details will be quite interesting to know. It is important to get to understand exactly what he's saying by strategic reserves. The market is buying not from any strategic reserve from the open market. Would a strategic reserve be feeding the market? To what extent can that happen? I have always maintained that government's most practical way of intervening in pricing now, using its fiscal space, will actually be a review of its own revenue generating space within the price build-up. But to really want to build a strategic reserve, I would need a bit more insight to be able to comment if it's operationally practical. What sometimes governments may do or maybe have been doing now is actually to subsidize its own agencies who are also operating on the same market to keep prices down, because it makes every other competitor also bring prices down. But that, I think, it's very unfair and maybe quite illegal. It may be possibly it's being done as we speak, but it's not proper, because it means you are distorting the market. You are subsidizing one player against another person. So what are you really doing? You are trying to knock out the private sector, because the private sector is not being subsidized, but it's competing with somebody who is being subsidized. That would be a major problem for the market. We've had wins of some of these things, but if that's the approach, I would strongly advise that it's not done, because if that's done, that's quite illegal, and that's very unfair to the private sector. It means that government practically is telling the private sector to get out of the market.
So that was Senyor Hosi actually sharing his thoughts on this particular issue. He believes that, well, it might not be a good idea for government to actually step in and trying to control prices for you as a consumer. We take a short commercial break and we will be right back. This is Marketplace, where we talk about the issues that affect you and I, the developments on the international market and how it affects you. When we are back, we're looking at the MPC. The Bank of Ghana has been meeting to review the health of the economy. How does it affect you if you plan to take a loan very soon? I'll be telling you more on that after this commercial break. Well, you're welcome back to Marketplace. So basically where we look at development on the international market, the Ghanaian community, and how it affects you if you're a businessman or even as a consumer out there. Now, the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana is rounding up its meeting on the health of the economy. The committee over the past days have had to meet, or what they call their pre-MPC meeting, to look at the various sectors of the economy. But looking at the current developments, with the policy rate which stands at 26%, be maintained or what? Let's get onto the phone lines and speak to Courage Mate. Here's an economist. Courage, good afternoon, and you are welcome to Marketplace. Now, what are your expectations with respect to the Bank of Ghana's verdict on the economy?
Well, good afternoon, George. I expect the Bank of Ghana to maintain the policy rate at 26%. The status quo should be maintained. Now, it's a fact that we saw some substantial decline in the rate of inflation in October to 15.8%. But I dare say that this is not different from what we've seen throughout the year till date. I mean, if you take the first 9 months of this year, we've seen fluctuation, volatility in the rate of headline inflation. Now, this up and down movement leaves you with little confidence to ease the monetary regime. You need a sustained and successive months decline for you to be sure that the inflation pattern is now heading back towards a low and stable regime. So one data point reduction for me is not a sufficient basis. That's the first point. The second point, again, is that we are in the electioneering period where demand pressures are going to continue to kick up because of the election spendings, And so you need a monetary stance that would contain these demand pressures. That is the second point. Then the other point is in your first news item, you mentioned the risk of crude oil price going up in December on the international market. If that happens, that is a risk to inflation again, because despite the expectation that the government will use strategic reserve to contain the price increases, I think that will happen only in one area of the market. That's the largest market player in terms of OMCs, and the other guys may be pushed to increase price if that happens, and so it will also filter into inflation dynamics. Then again in December, there is a high chance that the Fed may hike their fund rate, and if that happens again, it has its currency implications. As we speak also, businesses are demanding dollars to make do on their obligations for goods that they are importing for the festivities. And so you also want to maintain a tight monetary stance so that there may be no exacerbation of the currency pressure. So for me, I think that when you put all the variables together, the one data point reduction in inflation, though substantial, should not be sufficient enough to ease the monetary regime.
But Courage, I mean, these are quite very interesting developments, some would ask. And rather, from these developments or these things that you've highlighted, I would prefer, I see more of maybe a 1% hike in the policy rate.
I wouldn't be surprised myself to see a 100 basis point reduction in the policy rate, okay? Because if you see the substantial decline, you think...
Courage, I was talking about the fact that looking at those issues that you've highlighted, which shows that the threat to the economy is still not over. Rather, a 100 basis point increase should be the way out.
No. I'm actually not expecting an increase. For me, I do not expect the Monetary Policy Committee to increase it at all, because the peak for inflation has already occurred. It occurred in the first quarter of this year. That was at 19.2%. And even that period, we had the policy rate being maintained at 26%. Now, the rate of inflation, both headline inflation as well as core inflation, are doing below their recent peaks. And so to the extent that inflation, although still high, remains below the peak, I don't think that there's a threat of further inflation, and so that should not warrant any increase.
But Courage, again, let's look at the economy. Let's look at the economy. One would also ask that what a verdict are you looking forward to in terms of what the Bank of Ghana will say about the economy? First, one will talk about our public debt and also our position when it comes to import and then export.
Well, I expect a generally improved picture when the central bank releases its data. First of all, you see that exchange rate development relative to the same time last year would be much more positive. We are still doing marginally under 5% year-to-date depreciation. At this point last year, we're doing in the region of 15% depreciation. And so that should be a positive development in the area of exchange rate. Then in the area of inflation, that declined to 15.8%, puts it roughly below the same rate of inflation we had at the same point last year. Then again, if you consider the fact that fiscal consolidation remains on track despite the risk that we see. And I also think that when the MPC releases its data, we expect to see some marginal improvement in MPLs, all of that things being equal, mainly because of the restructuring that was done to most of these energy sector debt in August, September. So if that is captured into the latest data, there should be some improvement in MPLs. Of course, we also expect to see a decline in the 91-day Treasury bill rate, which should also mean that over time, if this is sustained, credit to the private sector should be sustained also. So overall, I think that it is good for the economy and positive data should be released by the MPC.
Courage, it looks like you're quite optimistic about things for the economy, looking at what you're telling me.
Yeah, I think that overall it's an optimistic outlook, but we need to be cautious against the fact that the elections need to turn out successfully for us to see that there are no overruns on the fiscal side. If the fiscal sides are maintained in an efficient manner, as we have seen under the IMF so far, then the positive expectations should be consolidated next year going forward.
Courage Mate is an economist with Data Bank. He's quite optimistic about things for the economy when it comes to the Bank of Ghana's verdict on how things are fared so far. I'll be looking out for the public debt. It stood at 110 billion Ghana cedis as of July this year. Is it going to go up or it's going to come down? And also the policy rate stands at 26%. Will it go up or come down? When it goes up, it has implications on the loan that you're actually servicing or if you intend to take one. Well, it's that time when we go to the agenda space and we look at what businesses are talking about and what my colleague Kuku Oban has been looking up to when it comes to the business agenda.
It's Thursday once again. You're welcome to the business agenda. It is powered by Joy Business. And in today's edition, the Chief Executive of the Petroleum Commission, Theophilus Eshirin, is impressing on fabrication firms in the oil and gas sector the need to be more efficient in their operations. According to him, it's about time these local firms won contracts on their merit and as well reposition in competitive pricing towards advancing the local content agenda and as well help government cut back on expenses.
When you start creating these preferences for local business, the objective is to help them grow to the point where they become competitive. And as is done in every industry, you first give them that preference, they must work harder and get to the point where they are competitive enough to be able to survive without any preferences and even to the extent of going out of the country. And so it's important for them, having been successful to fabricate, now to move to higher levels of efficiencies so that their pricing could be competitive.
Is there the fear that if they don't do that, maybe outsourcing and looking out or those who request some of these fabrications from them would look elsewhere?
The reality is that these costs would have to be borne by the resource owner, which is the state. So if it can cost us X to build an FPSO, we don't want to pay 1.5X. In other words, the more efficient they are able to produce these products, these units, the better.
Is it a case that they are deliberately not being efficient or it's because they are still young?
Well, I think many factors. One of them is the classical principle of economies of scale. The other is generally being efficient and automating your processes a little bit. Other issues relate to putting proper management systems in place so that what you can do in 2 days, you don't do it in 3 or 4 days, among others. So it's actually part of the development life cycle. And I think experience also counts. If you start something, you are not as quick on it as somebody who's done it many, many times.
You had a chief executive of the Petroleum Commission, Theophilus Eshirin, there. But the fabrication firms disagree with this position. According to them, the relatively high cost of their products cannot be attributed to their inefficiencies, but rather the high import duties that are slapped on their inputs, plus the rebate enjoyed by multinational companies who import such products into the country.
The main concern or the main issue facing us is the fact that the steel, most of the steel that we purchase, it's not manufactured locally. So all this steel has to be imported into the country. We buy our steel from China, from Europe. So bringing those things, the taxes on all those steel materials has a direct impact on the fabrication, because the charge for fabrication is quoted per ton. So I think if the government or the local content agency can put in a measure to take away some of these taxes, then it would be, a little bit easier for the local companies, and then we can quote realistic, values for the fabrication. The cost can come down.
So for you, that's the major bottleneck?
Exactly, that's the major bottleneck. And the fact that you see some of the people that we have to employ, sometimes we have to call in experts, because this industry is still growing, and it's not everything that we have Ghanaians who have the capacity to execute.
The cost of bringing in these items are quite high because of the import duty that we have to pay to bring them in. But on the flip side, it's not kind of helping us a lot, because most of these big companies, that is the oil companies or the big multinational companies, are given the mandate to bring in those same items without paying any duty. They are given that incentive to keep them in country. I do understand that. But if I have to bring this things into the country, and I have to pay 65% import duty, whilst the big multinational companies can go in there and get the same thing and bring it into the country at no cost, or that's no cost, no kind of import duty or anything, then it becomes, our price doesn't become competitive for them.
Gives them a competitive
advantage, exactly, and this is a big problem.
That's it for Business Agenda for today. Do make a date with us next week for another edition.
And that was Kuku Aban bringing us a wrap of his Thursday Business Agenda, talking about issues in the oil industry as well. And sometimes it's good to get in touch with us. People say, can I get your number? I want to get in touch with you. Well, social media is there. You can stay interactive. That is on Twitter, it's at Joy Business GH, and on Facebook, it's Joy Business. For more, you can also log on to myjoyonline.com/business. And that's all for Marketplace. I am George Riafe, and have a lovely weekend. It's Friday. I love my Fridays. Have a lovely weekend, and remember, be good.